Hello, everyone. Welcome to this insightful session on the topic Enable a Future Ready Workforce by Aon in Track 2 of NexTech Southeast Asia HR Summit 2021. COVID 19 has changed what we define as a normal. Changing expectations and definitions have upended how we define the workplace. Accompanying that is a need to review and rethink what success looks like in the workforce. What has worked before successfully probably doesn't work anymore. But everyone knows this. The bigger question is what's next for organizations? How can organizations manage their transition effectively and what needs to change? And more importantly, where should organizations start in conceptualizing this transition? In this session, we will discuss the various aspects of the talent management cycle that needs to change, from attracting the right individual to screening out the less appropriate individuals to hiring and eventually promoting your best fit talent. For individuals who may not have the right competencies at this point, it's either about developing them in role or rotating them to a more suitable role. Given the current crunch, organizations need to be able to do this in an objective way, and more importantly, in a scalable way. And with great pleasure, I would like to invite our speaker for this session, Wan Hua, Senior Consultant, Assessment Solutions at Aon. Wan Hua is a senior consultant with Aon's Assessment Solutions and registered chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society. Over more than a decade, Wan Hua has worked with clients across all sectors within Southeast Asia. She provides consultancy services in the design, development, and implementation of all components of the talent assessment process. This includes developing competency models, steering job analysis, conducting competency-based interviews, designing and implementing simulation exercises, and interpreting psychometric assessments. Wan also designs and carries out research studies to assess the validity of assessment processes and predicting eventual job performance and has written several thought pieces. So without any further delay, I would like to hand over the frame to Wan. Over to you.
Thanks, Varuni. Great, so thanks so much. Hi, everyone. And thanks for joining my session today on how we can support and develop a future-ready workforce. And a lot of the discussion will really be around what is high tech, what is high touch, and how can we enable organizations to handle these evolving challenges. So I'm hoping that this will be an interesting, insightful session. And I hope it triggers more thoughts in your minds as we go through the session, things about what can you do differently and how can we handle maybe different challenges that come up again. So let's get started. So let's start our discussion at probably the most important question. What is high tech? You can see in front of you, there are pictures and examples of what high tech will look like. In some organizations, it's about an immersive workplace, virtual reality, leveraging new tools, new technologies that come out. In other organizations, it could just mean an elaborate IT setup, having all the latest technologies that you need, for example, a wireless keyboard, laptops, multiple screens. So that might be the case for some organizations, but not all. To some individuals in certain roles, maybe high tech is having a telephone and using a scientific calculator. So organizations can fall upon any point of this high tech continuum. It means different things to different ones, and that's okay. Over my years, I have worked with many organizations to conduct employee engagement surveys or employee assessments. For those who have done these before, you would know a typical process would be to email participants the link to the survey or the assessment, along with their unique login ID. And participants would be able to copy the link and complete the assessment at their own convenience using whichever device works for them. And generally, this process works for everyone. But there are also cases and certain organizations where I've worked with where the request for an email ID is met with an awkward silence. And the reason for that, some of their employees just don't have email IDs. They've not been issued one. They don't have work laptops. They might not even have work phones. So asking them to complete a survey using a link or a login ID which they have received over email, impossible. So I know a lot of you may be wondering, do such organizations still exist? I can tell you that they do. And maybe not for the entire organization, but definitely for certain groups of individuals or employees. For example, those that are constantly on the go. So maybe they don't really have office jobs. Maybe your logistics providers, your drivers, your riders. Or maybe some of you are even thinking, hey, maybe that's my organization. We do have people with no email IDs. And of course, that brings it all back to my point, that high tech means different things to different people, depending on their role, depending on the industry, and depending on the reference points. So these are things that we really should keep in mind when we try and define what is high tech for our organization. Similarly, high touch is another concept that we really need to think about and keep in mind. High touch is equally difficult to define. With changing environmental demands, our expectations and our perceptions of what is normal or comfortable have also constantly shifted. So my question is always, what does it really mean? Is our interaction considered high touch only if it's face-to-face, where we are sitting in the same room, we can actually physically see each other? How about virtually? We have someone on a virtual call basically we are in a virtual call right now. Is that high touch? Are we connecting? Am I engaging you? So can high touch actually happen virtually through other forms of communications and means? So I must admit, when COVID-driven work from home first started, I was horribly uncomfortable, getting me to switch on my webcams during video calls, during conference calls. I hated doing that. It was really uncomfortable for me. And I think it was the same for many, many people out there as well. But now, after about almost 2 years, after about a year and a half, I think perceptions have shifted. I'm a lot more comfortable now being on video calls, switching on my cameras. And from my interactions with my clients, with my colleagues, I can see that the same shift is happening for everyone. I'm starting to see more people turn on their cameras. I see people getting uncomfortable if their cameras are switched on, other people's cameras are not switched on, and so on and so forth. So a lot of these perceptions shift. So another thing to also think about, video conference meetings, things like this, they are a great way to engage and to drive that feeling of engagement or touch. And beyond these, we also do see a lot of organizations becoming quite creative in the way that they try and achieve this high touch environment. So nowadays, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of examples around virtual team bonding, virtual meals, virtual town halls. I've even seen virtual cooking classes. So that was one of my favorites because I think it's really interesting, where employees get sent via post ingredients for a meal, and they actually gather as a group to cook together and eat together at the end of it. So there are a lot of creative ways to do high touch, and they all serve a purpose. But another thing that I wanted to highlight is also the idea of Zoom exhaustion. So actually there is a sweet spot. Too much, employees get frustrated, they get disengaged, and basically they just stop showing up. Maybe you started virtual town halls, people got excited, you used to have 100% attendance, and you see it dropping. That's a sign that that's too much engagement. So high touch, great, but at a certain point, too much touch. So you need to think about that as well when you're kind of defining what high touch looks like in your organization. So another question that I often do get is, why does this discussion even matter? Why are we spending so much time trying to define high touch, high tech? And the reason for that is because it has a fundamental impact on your employees. And beyond that, it has a bigger impact on your business. And it always comes back to that. HR is not a concept in isolation. HR is meant to support and drive the business. So understanding the fundamental truth that different organizations have different needs needs to be at the forefront of your consideration. Because without it, that's when implementation fails and your entire strategy for people just falls apart. And it becomes a wasted effort. All your resources will yield nothing because it is just not effective. So I'll tell you a story about one of my clients, and this was probably 2 or 3 years ago. So this client, we were speaking post an employee engagement survey, and they were highlighting that a key problem in the organization was employee engagement and attrition. So this client mentioned that a lot of her top performers, they were leaving. They felt underworked, underappreciated, overworked, and basically just really frustrated with the organization. And the other problem, the poor performers were actually staying. They refused to leave, but they were poor performers and they were ineffective in their role. But the problem is because they were refusing to leave, the organization really struggled because performance was at a all-time low. So what the organization then tried to do was they tried to re-engage the employees. So the organization tried to remind the employees that they were doing all they can to help restructure the organization, to make the organization a lot more tech savvy. And one of the things that they did was they actually introduced RPA, robotic process automation. So this was a time where they were implementing a lot of new technologies, a lot of very interesting technologies, but there was a problem here. So I was aware that in this job, the organization was not known to be very tech savvy. Employees were not the most welcome to new technologies. So I was also wondering about this. And later, in the conversation as it continued, the client actually admitted to me and said that she was actually not fully on board with this new, job revamp and all, because she wasn't sure that the staff could actually implement the technologies. She actually confessed that most of her staff were actually still using desktops because the organization just could not convince them to switch to laptops. It was too big of a shift. So on one hand, you have employees who find moving from desktop to laptops a big shift. On the other hand, the organization was actually trying to push everyone into adopting RPA and getting them to learn how to code, getting them to learn how to use all these new programming languages that they've never seen before in their lives, never heard of before in their lives. So that's the problem. That's exactly the problem. We have organizations who are uncomfortable with technology, being told that RPA will help improve their job satisfaction. And these employees' reaction to the uncomfortably rapid rate of change, they either left or they dug their heels in and rejected all forms of change. This created a very stagnant environment that was not conducive to those that actually wanted to learn. So what happened was your high performers then chose to leave the organization because this was not a place that they could learn and grow. And your underperformers just continued to stay, rejecting every form of change the organization tried to put in place. The organization did not understand their people. Of course, it's all done in good intention. We review people's jobs, we revamp the way they work, and we support them with new technology. But if you don't understand where your people are at, and you blindly implement new technologies and force people to adopt these new technologies, it doesn't quite work, especially when people neither understand or care about these new technologies. So that's when a lot of discussion then has to happen. What is a future-ready workforce? What does it look like? So what I have done here is put together some guidelines or guide rails that organizations can use when they approach the concept of defining a future-ready workforce for themselves. When we think about a future-ready workforce, it should be one that allows employees to adapt and evolve. Employees should be encouraged to reskill on the fly. So it's not just about learning one skill, for example, learning how to code in Java and using that skill for the rest of their lives. It doesn't work that way. It's about reskilling, upskilling. So employees also need to be able to harness new technologies, as I mentioned in my story previously, because that creates competitive advantage for the organization. Employees should be put in an environment which drives innovation and supports them in taking calculated risks. Finally, a key thing for employees is also to be encouraged to drive process efficiencies. And that again has a key impact on our return on sales. Employees who are driven and empowered to make changes to the way they work, those are employees who will stay with the organization and will make sure that the organization improves along with them. So one of the key things that I talked about was really selecting the right individual. Based on our research, Aon has identified 9 competencies which we have defined as critical for an individual to be a successful virtual worker. And these are things that are fundamental. Right now, globally, probably no one is back in the office full time. So everyone in some form or some sense is a virtual worker. So we need to select the right person who can work in that kind of environment, especially if the job is one that requires the individual to work virtually a significant amount of their time. So we have identified these 9 competencies broken into 2 groups: Agile Mindset, so whether the individual is someone who can learn and adapt to changing circumstances, as well as virtual ability, so their ability to drive their own results, to have integrity, even though no one is physically watching them at every moment of time, to be accountable for the work that they have done, to be able to handle virtual collaboration and digital communication effectively, as well as to have mental endurance. And why does it all matter? So I've talked a lot about, all the work that we have to do is in redefining the organization, in redefining how high touch and high tech look like. And the difference is that if we select the right person in that fits into the organization that we have defined, then it makes a key difference in our bottom line. As you can see from some of the matrices here, in a validation study that we have done, a virtual worker who scores high in our assessments is someone who is 5 times more likely to effectively communicate in a digital environment, 4 times more likely to be productive when working in a virtual environment, and nearly 7 times as likely to have strong performance across all key virtual work areas. And the same thing holds for individuals who have high Agile Mindset scores and high virtual ability scores. They are much more likely to learn well, to handle change, to handle adapting circumstances, as well as to manage their environment and work virtually effectively, even when there is no one looking over their shoulders. And one of the key things that organizations may not always think about is what happens with the employee after they join the organization. In my earlier slide, I talked about enabling, aligning, and ensuring that you have the right individual to the new organization. The next step, and perhaps equally important or more important, is ensuring that they are enabled and developed to grow and continue being engaged. So with traditional organizations, there is a very linear growth. So employee comes in at the start, at the bottom of the ladder, and it's a one-dimensional upward progression. You do something well, you continue doing that thing well, and we move you upwards to keep doing more of the same thing. But given the current changing circumstances, and if we are hiring for people who love to learn and want to grow, then that doesn't work. Asking them to do the same thing over and over again, but better and faster, doesn't quite work. We need to give our employees choice. So that's when we have different types of opportunities or organizations. So if you can see here, it all falls along a continuum. So most organizations now maybe fall into the Y ladder kind of structure, where employees can then choose if they want to diversify and move into either a managerial position or a technical position. Employees also maybe have a career path kind of workforce where they can move within a function. Increasingly, I am seeing employees have the opportunities to move across functions as well. And this is because a lot of organizations are recognizing the importance of cross-functional work. And eventually, the aspiration or the hope is that we will move towards a workforce that is so flexible, employees are able to move into any part of the organization by learning new skills and then applying for the new job. So they no longer have to move only in a certain direction, but they can move where they're needed and where they actually want to go. And of course, you can see how that really supports their learning as well as their engagement. So I know there's a lot of information that I've shared with you today, but really what I wanted to highlight is you're not alone. Your organization's not alone. What we have done this year is Aon has actually conducted research across 1,500 organizations spanning diverse industries across Asia Pacific and Middle East. And we found that organizations generally have admitted to not being the best at leveraging data to make talent decisions. In fact, one of the key findings we've really identified was that less than a third of organizations actually used scientific or psychometric assessments in order to make good talent decisions or data-driven decisions. So I know this is not all of the information that I can provide to you, and I don't have any clear answers for you, but I hope that this session has been an opportunity for you to rethink about how you define some of these common concepts and maybe walk away with some new insights. So thank you so much for your time and for listening in today.
Thank you so much, Wan, for these incredible insights. I really liked how you beautifully articulated your thoughts on enabling a future-ready workforce. I totally resonate with your viewpoints on how high-tech continuum means different things for different organizations. On the other hand, high-touch is all about connection, interaction, and engagement. Doesn't need in-person interactions. I completely agree with your thoughts on Zoom exhaustion as well. You rightly said that the discussion about high-tech and high-touch is important, since it has a fundamental effect on employees and business. Indeed, a future-ready workforce of tomorrow is where right leaders can drive change, where employees can thrive and encouraged for process efficiency. Upskilling and reskilling is the crucial key to success in the new world of work. Aon's 9 competency models for an individual to be successful was very gripping and informative. Concluding this session, I would like to thank Wan for joining us here today. It's been a great pleasure. I would also like to thank everyone for joining us. Do stay tuned for many more such insightful sessions throughout the day.